rise, face the jury, and hearken to its verdicts.
State of Wisconsin versus Kyle Rittenhouse. The first count of the information, Joseph was a bond. We, the jury, find the defendant Kyle H. Rittenhouse not guilty. As to the second count of the information, Richard McGinnis, we, the jury, find the defendant Kyle H. Rittenhouse not guilty. As to the third count of the information, unknown male, we, the jury, find the defendant Kyle H. Rittenhouse not guilty. As to the fourth count of the information, Anthony Huber, we, the jury, find the defendant Kyle H. Rittenhouse not guilty. As to the fifth count of the information, Gage Grosskreutz, we, the jury, find the defendant Kyle H. Rittenhouse not guilty.
Members of the jury, are these your unanimous verdicts? Is there anyone who does not agree with the verdicts as read? Would you wish the jury polled? No. Okay. Okay, folks, your job is done, and we started just about 3 weeks ago. And I told you it could last 2 weeks and 2 days. This is 2 weeks. This is 3 weeks. You were a wonderful jury to work with. You were punctual. You were attentive.
Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring.
I have the Director of Community Engagement for Senator Amanda Capoletti. I have Danielle Powerhouse Phillips. Good morning.
Hi, how you doing?
Now, we have a lot going on. All hell, frankly, is breaking loose in our politics. All hell is breaking loose in this country. And now we have issues with the judge. I'm sure people had issues with the jury selection. I'm sure people had issues with the prosecution and the defense, for that matter. So if you could run through this and let us know I guess the first question I would ask is, was this an uphill climb for the prosecution, and why?
Yeah, I think it was going to be, because I think what a lot of people are not necessarily talking about when they're talking about the case is the actual law around self-defense. So when you have a self-defense scenario, really the legal question is going to be, once the interaction started between Rittenhouse and the other men, did Rittenhouse feel that his life was in danger and that he needed to use force to not be killed? And that really was going to be the only thing that would have been assessed. And so I think that I know there was video of it. It sounded like there was a fight. It sounded like, maybe there was some convincing argument that he really did feel his life was in danger and he needed to shoot people. And so it was going to be really the job of the defense to say, of the prosecution to say, no, that was not the case. But you had Rittenhouse himself on the stand, some people thought being very believable and saying, yes, my life was threatened. He was crying. He was, he said all the right things to play into his self-defense, and clearly it worked. So, I mean, what they were fighting against in many ways were the actual facts of the encounter.
Okay. Now, just that, setting that right, let's talk about that. Now, I guess from a layman's perspective, which I'm getting, is it sounds like, if, I know this is a little exaggerating, but if it sounds like if two people was in the room and one quickly made a move to tie his shoe, the guy can pull out a gun, shoot the guy, go to court and say that I felt like my life was in danger.
No, I mean, that would absolutely not be correct. Like, there had to be, and I didn't follow the facts of the specific encounter. I know there was a fight, and I guess somebody had a skateboard or something like that. I don't know who started the fight. I don't know how they ended up in the fight, but it has to be reasonable, that a reasonable person felt that their life was in danger and that they needed to shoot the other person. In your scenario, absolutely not. That would not be.
So I guess what I'm looking at, what I'm thinking is who, I guess it's then you're saying it's up to a jury to figure out what's reasonable.
Yeah. I mean, and that's a standard that the law uses quite a bit. They'll often say a reasonable person standard. So what would a reasonable person think? What did he think? Really, a lot of criminal law is about the mindset of the perpetrator. So quite a lot of the way that the criminal laws are written is about intent. It's about, what were you thinking at that time? What were you thinking during the encounter? I think that reasonable people had a lot to say about the fact that he seemed to intend to inflict violence even before he got into that situation, right?
Right.
Like, he drove to that state, he had a gun. There was an argument to be made that he went there intending to inflict violence on people. And if they could have proven that, I don't think he gets off of those charges.
Now, but in generally speaking, it's under the stand your ground law. That's a very difficult law to prosecute.
I think so. I mean, I think the law was the self-defense, and yeah, I mean, I think it can be, because what they were actually charging him with, the prosecutor, they charged him with murder. So they charged him with like first-degree murder, involuntary manslaughter, different kinds of murder. And so then his affirmative defense was, well, it wasn't murder, it was self-defense. And so what the prosecutor would have done is they would have had to show, for first-degree murder, for example, that you intended with malice to shoot and kill somebody, or that you were so reckless and negligent, and more so than the average person, that you killed someone, which would be like a manslaughter standard. And then his response to that was like, no, actually, it was none of those things. I got people approached me, got into a fight with me, and I killed them in self-defense.
Okay. And it doesn't matter how he got there. It doesn't matter what he did when he got there. And just to be clear, for people that don't are very sketchy about the whole self-defense thing, does it matter if the person has a gun as well?
So I was surprised because one of the charges was illegal possession of a weapon, which, he was a 17-year-old kid. He wasn't legally supposed to be carrying that gun. They actually threw that charge out, which was kind of wild. So I think that
the judge threw it out.
Yes, the judge threw out that charge. And I think the judge also prevented the prosecutors from saying certain things. Like, they couldn't call the people he shot victims. And I think they suppressed some statements about Rittenhouse saying that he wanted to inflict violence on people. So clearly there were a bunch of rulings that were made that improved his case, the defendant's case.
Okay, there was pictures on the internet, and I'm sure everybody saw them, of Rittenhouse throwing up white supremacy signs, posing with other people. I don't know if it was the Proud Boys, I'm not sure, but why wasn't that in evidence, or can that go into evidence, or what?
Would it have been him doing it that night or not?
No, it was him. I think it was after he got charged. He was in a bar, and he was holding up white supremacy signs.
I mean, I think the argument would have been, they would have tried to introduce it, and then what the defense would say was that it's character evidence. So often character evidence is not allowed in trials because we like to say that people are innocent before proven guilty, right? Like, we don't like to say because you're a bad person, surely you killed all these people. And so certain evidence of character is not allowed. So, for example, if I was on trial for murder and they brought up that last year I was in a hit and run and I like fled the scene of the crime. That kind of evidence would be excluded because they would say, oh, it's going to bias people against her. And this is like a new crime and a separate thing. So we shouldn't be able to bring in evidence of her bad character because it's going to improperly influence people. So the argument would have been, no, it's character evidence. It has nothing to do with the actual incident on the night. And so it shouldn't be brought in. But I think that the difficulty for everybody, and I think especially non-lawyers and even lawyers as well, like for myself, is that you look at this situation, right? There was a young kid who's 17 years old, white, who is carrying an illegal weapon that he should not be carrying, crosses state lines because his mother brings him there, supposedly to protect property, which I don't think anybody really believes that, goes to a Black Lives Matter march. Clearly, he's anti-Black Lives Matter. Somehow gets into an altercation with unarmed people and then shoots and kills them. There's so many facts in there that are troubling to the public, right? Like a white kid walking away from that situation unscathed. You know, the images of the cops just very gently walking him out. Like, oh, you're not a threat. You're not a, you know, us knowing that if he was Black, he would have been shot dead on the spot. And that's not speculation. Like the nationwide statistics show that if you are Black, you're more likely to be killed in a police encounter. So it's not just a feeling we have, it's the actual truth. So, you know, the images of him then, you know, when all is said and done, he goes to court and he's treated with these kid gloves. And you have this judge like bending over backwards to give what seems like favorable rulings, to be sitting side by side with him, which you would never see in a regular court.
From your perspective, was the judge playing too much of a role? Like, in other words, did the judge tip the scales for this kid?
I didn't watch the whole trial, but it certainly a judge can tip the scales for somebody. Judges are notoriously either like pro-prosecution or pro-defense in their rulings. Like people will know, they'll say, oh, that judge is really pro-prosecution. Most judges are former prosecutors, not former defense attorneys. So judges will have reputations for being pro or con one side of the other, or being more lenient or being not. It seemed in this case that he was ruling a lot in this kid's favor. And even just just him sitting side by side with this kid, him letting pick out the jury numbers, like that's going to influence the jury. Oh, this is not a bad kid. He's not sitting there in his, prison outfit because he could be bailed out. He's not sitting there in handcuffs. He's not sitting there with a disinterested lawyer who's like, forget this guy. Like he's already lost. Like there was just a lot of body language and even rulings that I think would have had to influence the jury.
Now, is there a way that that judges play a big role, as we just saw in this case? And not only did we just, the whole world saw how judges can influence a case. My question is that's just gonna rock. That's just the way the criminal justice system is, and it's just gonna go that way. There's no law, there's nothing that can stop a judge from tipping the scales if that's what he or she wanted to do.
Yeah, I mean, judges can be appealed, although it's important to know that the prosecutor cannot appeal the decision because that would violate double jeopardy. He's already been charged and found not guilty. The prosecutor can't then challenge and say, look, the judge made all of these errors, but the defendant would challenge. So usually it's the defendant who's appealing. But in this case, he got off. Like he's not going to appeal. But the prosecutors lost. Like they took the whole case. They can't take it again. Like it's over. But typically Sorry?
So in the criminal justice system, if a prosecutor loses, he loses. But if a defendant loses, they could appeal.
Yes, you have a constitutional right to an appeal. So typically the check on judges would be appealing. You would say that this judge committed judicial error. They made this bad ruling. They didn't follow such and such rules. And it would go to a higher court to analyze, did the judge do that? So that's one check. You also have like judicial commissions where you can complain, like you can do like ethics complaints, but they usually rarely go anywhere. Like every state will have like a board that's supposed to see if these judges are being biased or whatnot, and they might investigate, but there's so many that they can typically go nowhere. And then the response from a lot of people would just say, well, then vote them out. Well, next time they come up for election, vote them out. But what's interesting about, I don't think that there's any practicing trial lawyer in America who will tell you that like that judge was so off the mark from like what a typical judge does. Like that's just how it is. It's just that most people don't pay attention and they don't care unless it's a high profile case that's on TV.
So that's basically how it is in the courtroom a lot of time. All right.
Even worse, usually, in terms of the way that they're insulting to defendants. They treat them like, you know, in some ways, incredible racism, incredible bias, talking down to people. It's awful.
Okay, so that being said, I think now let's go to the jury. Correct me if I'm wrong, as a layman talking, the defendant lawyer can somewhat pick the jury, right or wrong.
Yes, so there will be, when the trial is scheduled and the jury is impaneled, there is a process called voir dire, which is where both sides get to talk to and pick potential jurors. Each side will get to strike a certain number of jurors. So I think it's like maybe 3. I don't know what the rules are. I think it varies by state. I'm not sure. But you can question them, and each side can exclude like up to a certain number of people. You only get like maybe 3, I think, and say, well, they have this bias or that bias, and that's why I don't want them. You can never exclude based on race, which is where a lot of the trouble comes from and where a lot of the challenges come from on appeal, where a defendant will lose and say, well, it's because all of the Black jurors were excluded.
Okay, but there's a way to wherein I guess there's a loophole, if you will, that defense lawyers can somewhat get around to be able to choose a particular group of people that they feel may have a sympathy towards the defendant.
Yeah, I mean, that's always what you want. And actually, the data shows typically that white male jurors are the most punitive. They typically want people to go to jail and prison, and they're like the harshest. And then white women are kind of could go either way, and that women of color are the most sympathetic. People of color are the most sympathetic. But obviously, in this case, you probably weren't going to want that. You know, they probably were going to want, you know, the ideal juror would have been Republican, anti-Black Lives Matter, pro-Second Amendment. Any of those traits is what they would have probably looked for.
Okay. And now we have the prosecution. Did he perform that case correctly? As far as what most lawyers are saying, what do most lawyers say about that case?
Most of them are saying no. They're saying that the prosecutor did not appear that competent, that I guess there was only one witness. And that witness even said something along the lines of that Kyle Rittenhouse acted in self-defense, which is odd. I mean, you would never call a witness who was going to actually be pro-defendant. Yeah. So, I mean, a lot of sentiment is that person like ruined it.
Now this is the law of the land. The stand your ground defense law is the law of the land in these states. And there's a lot of people that don't that don't like that. There's a lot, some people that don't, they look at the TV screen, they saw what happened, and they say, yo, this isn't justice. However, they are in a state, or their whole environment, if you will, if they don't understand that if they were to have got shot, because, whatever, it could be the same situation. They could then be laying in the coffin and their family get an incompetent judge. Or they can get a good judge, and the judge just can't get around this law. The Stand Your Ground law right now is currently in most states. It's probably not in 15 or less states right now. So we have NRA, Stand Your Ground law, in most of the United States right now. And the other day, there was a guy who said this.
At this point, we're living under corporate and medical fascism. This is tyranny. When do we get to use the guns? No, and I'm not, that's not a joke. I'm not saying it like that. I mean, literally, where's the line? How many elections are they going to steal before we kill these people?
So, no,
And obviously the congressman said something about it. I don't think he said strong. The congressman didn't stand up to the guy strong enough. Well, that's not, we don't want to. But things like that have to be thwarted. Those type of things that people say, it would have been great if he had opened up an educational discussion, because people are not educated around these type of issues. There are people out there that think that they could shoot people now, thanks to this. Now, let me ask you a question. Now you're in a state in Pennsylvania, right? That's a Stand Your Ground state.
I think so. I'm not sure. Yeah.
Yeah, actually.
Oh, it is. Okay.
Do you think most people, I guess the gun situation, do you think that's almost like an entitlement program? Like in other words, they give their guns to their kids, right? I guess when the kids, I've seen on a video where I've seen kids shooting guns. Mm-hmm. So I'm saying, in other words, what I'm saying is, how do you feel about that law? Do you think it's too complicated? Or do you think they have to revisit it?
Well, I think the problem with all of these kind of self-defense laws, stand your ground laws, is that I don't know that they were necessarily written in mind and knowing the amount of people who are armed. Like, it becomes very different if you don't have a gun, right? And so I think that in the United States, anytime that you're looking at making use of force legal, you're going to have to then answer the question about guns. And we haven't done that, right? Like, it's virtually impossible in the United States to put any restriction on gun ownership. And in Pennsylvania, they're trying to pass open carry laws. The governor won't sign it, but that's what they're trying to do. And so all of these things become very dangerous when the person that you're having this altercation with is armed. And so, anytime we think about these laws, like, we need to also think about guns, but that's not how these laws pass. Like, they kind of pass when there's one bill and one issue, and you fight and fight to even get that thing passed. But then once it does, it creates this ripple effect of like, oh gosh, now all these people are shooting people. Well, now how are we going to address that? And because we can't, because, the gun laws are completely unchecked, or people want them more, it's just a nightmare situation.
I'll say this. I think that, when most people go to the store, not even the store, but when most people get things that they like, or when most people get a gun and they're born into having guns, I don't think anybody thinks about the history of the Second Amendment. Where did it come from? How did it get here? Why am I allowed to hold this dangerous weapon? You know, it's going to be interesting going forward to see how people learn about that.
Right. Or or all the implications with race, right? That as soon as people of color start holding guns, suddenly everybody feels very different.
Right, right. Thank you for being here. Very educational.
Thank you.
All right. Really quickly, what we have seen in the basic verdict of Kyle Rittenhouse, from a political standpoint, C. Bella, why was this this verdict and this trial seen through the lens of race?
Well, for the obvious reason that it involves race. I mean, the shooting took place at a BLM protest, and so that's there. But I think what's more unique is the fact that, you know, the two people who were shot dead were actually white people. And so that's what makes it separate and apart from any other issue, but it still involves a young man going to protest for Black Lives Matter and, you know, bearing his AR-15, there to intimidate people, there to harass people. And that's the reason.
Right, right. There was a lot of our white brothers and sisters. Some of them are saying that that it wasn't about race. It was about a right to bear arms. Actually, also, we've seen the Republican Party make a lot of money off of this case. I mean, I believe it was Tucker Carlson that had Kyle on his show the very next day. Matter of fact, Tucker has a documentary from Fox News coming out about the shooting. Now, obviously, Pastor Von Merritt, we have already established the fact that that the base of the Republican Party consists of white evangelicals. Now, people could argue how much percentage of it is, but it's there. It's there. There's a decent base there. Matt Gaetz had made a statement on Fox News, and he said this.
He is not guilty. He deserves a not guilty verdict, and I sure hope he gets it, because you know what? Kyle Rittenhouse would probably make a pretty good congressional intern. We may reach out to him and see if he'd be interested in helping the country in additional ways.
For people that should know better, is it proper to turn this kid into a hero, not only to the public, but in his sight?
Well, you know, one of the interesting things that has come out in this, when I see these responses from people who are representatives, it kind of begs the question, well, who are you representing? And as leaders who are supposed to set the tone and set the example, what does this kind of hero worship, if you will, you know, what kind of a statement does this make? You know, that now we're saying, well, you know, the primary qualification for being able to be a congressional staffer is, you know, you went out and killed some people and got away with it. It is, you know, it's a sign of basically where things are in our politics. But as I continually say, none of this stuff is happening in a vacuum. This stuff is part of a continuum. We've seen this movie before. You have people that say, oh, well, it really wasn't about race because the people that were killed were white. Well, just before the Civil War, there was an abolitionist, a white man named, his name was Lovejoy. And some pro-slavery men, he ran a printing press. And some pro-slavery men actually went to shut down his printing press. And when he went to stop them, they shot him, murdered him, threw his printing press in the river. And this was part of the conversation in the period just before, I believe, Lincoln was elected and things really started to heat up. So in the continuum of history, if we look back and if we're students of history, once again, we can see that this is not unprecedented. This is something we've seen before. And the challenge is, as Benjamin Franklin said, if you don't learn from your history, then you're doomed to repeat it.
See, Bella, let me just now speaking of the law, right? I think politically this is a huge opening for people who are looking at these laws that come out of these states. And whether or not these particular laws are problems or not. And let me say this. A law that is passed in a state, when it overlaps to another state, is it somewhat embarrassing to the law? Is it embarrassing to the law that executed that, for example, we have a stand your ground, we have a self-defense. Kyle Rittenhouse came from another state, killed 2 men. So my point is that on that law which was established in Wisconsin, the right to bear arms, the right to self-defense, stand your ground, that combination, is it not an embarrassment to the country on why, how this law was put together, and do we need to look at those laws more closely?
Well, only some of us feel like it's an embarrassment. You know, that if governments, if local governments, local and state governments were operating in good faith, then they would revisit the laws that are written and improve them. But that's not what's happening. Everything is so highly politicized that, you know, everything is going to be dealt with on a partisan basis. You know, so for now, as long as these laws exist in red states, they have no impetus to change the law because they use this as they weaponize Second Amendment rights as a tool in order to defeat Democrats and make us seem like we want to strip people of their gun rights. And it's just not true. You know, it's sad, but, you know, these laws really need to be looked at and changed because you can't have vigilantes running around the streets and making citizens arrests. Half these people don't even fully understand and know the law. You know, if you take the case of Ahmaud Arbery, you know, these men, they're not fully clear on the entirety of the law. And they made a lot of mistakes that led to Ahmaud's death. You know, obviously it's being used as an excuse for literally, you know, profiling Ahmaud and then killing him dead, you know, but a lot of work needs to be done, but it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen because Second Amendment rights are very important to people and they don't want any changes, even reasonable changes. Like no one is going to, especially as long as Republicans are in office. And as far as Democrats utilizing this as a tool, I don't know how that's going to work because I feel like Democrats need to do a better job of bringing in more Republican voters. And I think using this as an issue is not a good strategy because as long as we discuss gun laws in the way that Democrats typically understand it and want to see, and how we want to see changes in the law, then we're not going to be able to win over any new voters. So I think Democrats should stay away from this as an issue. I don't think it's a winning issue. You know, I mean, all the mass shootings that we've had, there's still no changes. It's not, I don't think this is something that Democrats should touch. I mean, if we're in positions of power and states in seats that allow us to make these changes, then, you know, that's a different case. But to run on anything having to do with like gun rights, I don't think that would be an effective strategy for Democrats.
Right.
Can
Go
I-
ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, there's also something that this current environment from a legal standpoint is bringing out, because it's not just the laws, it's the application of the laws. See, part of what these trials and things are bringing out is the fact that, once again, you know, as we've been saying for decades and literally centuries, America has two legal systems. There's the law for us, and there's the law for them. The application of those laws, for example, I think a lot of people, again, I was a constitutional law student myself. A lot of people don't even understand that before the case began, the judge threw out the ability of them to charge Rittenhouse with the very act of taking an illegally obtained weapon across state lines.
Which would have been a federal crime, correct?
In itself. And now, if you or I were caught doing that, there'd be no question. We'd be in jail and we would not see the light of day.
Do you think that the judge made the correct decision when he decided that that the prosecution couldn't use Rittenhouse's like previous like racist comments and things like that?
That was clearly a judge using his discretion to literally put his thumb on the scales.
Right. Yeah.
He literally did that.
Right.
When he said that they couldn't be called victims.
Right. Yes, that was a big one.
But they could be called rioters, looters, or arsonists. Essentially, they could be called aggressors.
Right.
And so when he did that, he literally gave them the self-defense.
See, Bella, I'm wondering if this is an opening politically for people that want to change in the criminal justice system. Now, I don't think that change will come before the midterms. I don't think it's going to come, honestly, in the next year or two. I believe you need honest people that are willing to debate from both sides of the parties. But I'm wondering if it opens up politically for people to understand that there is something wrong with the justice system in this country. What do you think?
Absolutely. I think there's a lot of room here to make improvements. I mean, Black folks got Biden elected, and one of the reasons why is because we expect him to make major changes in criminal justice system. So there's several things that need to happen actually. Biden needs to start putting that on the top of his list, on the top of his agenda, because we want there to be significant Black voter turnout come the midterms. So the administration really does need to step up in terms of like what it's doing in terms of what it's doing for Black people, because we helped to get him elected, and we don't want to let down that segment of the voting population. So is very important. You're right.
Well, one of the things, Pastor Von Merritt, that I noticed that's wrong with the criminal justice system is that you have, like the word that you used earlier, discretion. And we've seen how that discretion can be used in to basically tip the scales. We have the judge letting in whatever evidence under the law, of course, but letting in whatever evidence or not calling people victims or doing different things that can make the jury make a decision that perhaps they wouldn't have before. What do you think?
Yeah, it actually points to a lot of what I was talking about earlier. I think the Democrats, particularly, they're on the right track with criminal justice reform because, as I was saying earlier, it's not just a matter of changing the laws themselves, but criminal justice reform or reform of the system seeks to change the way in which the laws are applied. And that affects things like that is particularly affected by things like discretion. What's the other thing? Immunity. You know, those are not laws in themselves, but those are the result of the application of the law. For example, immunity is an application of a law that allows a policeman to literally murder someone and not be liable for it, whereas you or I, as a citizen, we have no immunity. So the same law that you can't murder people without accountability, in its application through things like immunity. And that's where we look at how, again, I think the Democrats are on the right track in terms of pushing for systemic and systematic reform, but where they're missing it is basically explaining to people what that means. We're not trying to change the laws. We're trying to change the way the laws are applied so that they can be applied more equitably, more justly. And the one key in all of that makes or gives the system that ability to advantage one group at the cost of another is discretion. It's the amount of discretion. It's discretion that's given to judges. It's discretion that's given to prosecutors. And I don't know if you noticed, in an adversarial judicial system, in an adversarial by design court system, judges have discretion, prosecutors have discretion, defendants, the majority of whom tend to be us folks, have no discretion at all. And it's an implicit imbalance in the system. So I think, politically, the Democrats are really on the right track with pushing for systemic reform as opposed to just pushing towards the repeal of certain laws. Because as I keep saying, you can change the laws forever. We've been changing the laws. So for the last 200 years, okay, we've been changing the laws. But if you don't change the way the laws are applied, if you don't go at the systemic biases, then you get nowhere. You get a situation where right now, for example, that law, the citizens arrest law in Georgia that they were using was a Civil War era law. And it was specifically to allow slave owners to be able to go out and catch slaves. Okay, now Georgia has since last year repealed that law. But if you change the law and you repeal the law, but you don't change the judge's discretion in being able to apply the law and in effect nullify the jury, then so I think that again, Democrats are on the right track with that, but they've got to do a better job of really explaining what criminal justice reform systemically means.
You know, I only caught like the last part of what you said, but I think an important change that needs to be made is in jury selection, because I think a lot of it is actually systemic. You know, you have an all-white jury who's the ones deliberating on these cases. And oftentimes they already come with biases about Blackness and Blackness being threatening, you know, so this is why it's important that it be a mix of people of different ethnicities. You know, you in both trials, the Rittenhouse and the Ahmaud Arbery trial, you only have one Black juror. You know, and I believe that in the Ahmaud case, I think the town is 30% Black American. Right.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
You know, and because no matter how much you change these laws, when you have these biases implanted in people's mind, that's a systemic part of it, then it's not going to be a fair trial.
One of the things that I want to basically call out as well is Marjorie Taylor Greene. And she said this.
He's fined me over $60,500 in mask fines. I refuse to wear a mask. And Chris, I have to tell you something else. I'm not vaccinated. And I will be standing strong, standing up for the people across this country that refuse to get vaccinated.
This is a horrible bill that completely transforms America. It's full passage of the Green New Deal, and what it's going to do to our country is going to be very difficult to recover from. They are saying that it's going to grow jobs and build jobs, but that is not at all what it's going to do. It grows the size of our government. And as Americans, we know that once the government creates a program, it never ever ends. And here's the real problem with the so-called Build Back Better bill. It's communism. America was never meant to be a communist country, and Republicans are going to have to pledge all of our voters and pledge the American people that we will undo what has been done and the damage to this country by the Democrats. Going forward, we have to do everything we can and not just say it in great speeches and in interviews on television. Republicans are going to have to promise the American people to save America and stop this communist takeover.
She's basically doing the job of Kevin McCarthy. She is now the leader in the House. Kevin McCarthy is the one that whips the votes, that gets the party together to be able to vote in the House. She has completely taken him away and has said that she's taking control, and she wants everybody to vow to the voters that they will repeal this bill. With actions... Huh?
I'm sorry. Go ahead. I didn't mean
to
cut you
off. With actions like that, Pastor Von Merritt, how are we supposed to move forward if the Republican Party, they tried to do it with Obamacare? They tried to repeal that. They tried to repeal everything. How can we move forward with these common sense laws? That Biden law is going to make a big difference in people's wallets, giving people jobs. And this is not just black people. This is white people, Hispanic people, building bridges, taking care of climate change, making sure people are healthy in their bodies. If the Republican Party keeps on trying to repeal everything, how do we move forward and how do we work with?
Well, essentially, I think essentially that's the gamble that Biden is taking, basically. The gamble that he's taking is that, especially if he can get this human infrastructure bill passed, the combination of the two will create such an economic environment that that by the time the midterms come around, there will be enough enthusiasm and support for Democrats to come out and vote. You know why? Because then what they campaign on is all that good stuff you just got. You let these guys take control of Congress and it's all going to go away. So that's why, it in a politically speaking, he's sort of betting the bank on this infrastructure bill plus the human infrastructure bill. Okay. And that's why he's been letting voting rights, criminal justice reform, and those really heavily needed things take a back seat, because his gamble is if he can get these two bills through, it will create and affect such a change that, once again, next year, when the midterms come around, the Democrats don't have to argue against Trump or against all of that. They can make their argument simply this: you need to let us keep control of the House or the Senate, because these guys are telling you, if we get in control, all that stuff going away. It's all going away.
I'm sorry.
Is that a good bet? Is that a good bet that Biden is making?
I think it's a good bet, but I think he's executing it poorly if that's the strategy. Because first of all, you let all these months go by. Look at the news now. I'm afraid of milk prices. I'm afraid of inflation. What do we hear on the news today? Talk about higher gas prices, higher costs for this. Shipping is taking too long. And it's because the Biden administration is failing in terms of what they're letting us know about the state of the economy.
Is it a catch-22? In other words, let's say he would have.
It's not a catch-22. There's a way to be honest and upfront about what's happening in our system and still inspire people and give us hope. Like, for example, the stock market has been booming the whole time. If this had been the Republican Party, they would have been touting that as, hey, look at this great accomplishment. Unemployment is down. All these wonderful things that they could have been talking about the whole time. And what do they let happen? What do they let slip in the news? What do they let dominate the conversation in news? All this stuff about inflation, all this stuff. Christmas is coming. You're getting packages shipped. Now I'm worried I won't get a package delivered on time. And you know what? Things have slowed down a little bit. I probably wouldn't have noticed it had it not been for the fact that the news cycle is dominated by this news. Inflation is skyrocketing. And this is what I'm talking about, Democrats and their messaging problem. Mm-hmm. Okay, fine. And there's inflation, but let us know about what's the good things that are going on, because I'm filled with fear and I don't even buy milk. I'm an almond milk type of gal. Come on, Democrats, step up.
Go ahead, Pastor.
And I also think that once again, it's a good bet, but it's almost like really only putting half your chips on the table, because even if he gets this infrastructure bill and the human infrastructure bill through, even if he gets those things, if he doesn't take up voter registration, voter protection at the federal level, because the Republicans are making no secret about it. 47 states. They got 47 states passing laws that essentially say, we ain't gonna let these Black people vote.
And also, okay. How long is it gonna
at this point, the only thing that can override that is federal legislation. So even if he gets his economic package passed, if they don't move on protecting voting rights, it's not going to make a difference.
And how long do you think it's going to take for us to feel the effects of this bill being passed into law? How long do you think it's going to take for us? And we live in a bureaucratic system.
It's going to take
where
enough to
everyone-
wherein he gets elected next. But let me say this. I think we're going to have to ask President Manchin and President Sinema whether or not voting rights is at the top. Because let's be honest here. And that's why, that's why I believe a little tough talk to the people, reality, will do us very well. Manchin, we have a problem when it comes to Joe Manchin. Because sometimes I think he is wasting time just so he doesn't have to vote for this voting rights. I mean, he's trying to draw out this clock, waiting, him and Sinema, and it's like, what is the infrastructure bill, the human infrastructure, that's going to benefit their states the most. So what are they waiting for? They've looked at the bill, I don't know how many times. We've all been discussing this bill for months and months. They already know what they're going to take out, what they're not going to take out, how much things cost and everything. And let's be real honest. This $1 trillion bill is really not a $1 trillion bill because it's over 10 years, which means there's only a few billion that's going to go into this every year.
Right.
But this is where Democrats again fail. Why let people believe that it's all this heavy spending? I only recently found out that it was being spread over 10 years. Why do Democrats constantly let the Republicans control the narrative and make us seem to be these crazy spenders who out of control?
Because a good message is always difficult to get out when people are lying about it. Go ahead, Pastor Von Merrick.
And again, also the media plays a huge part in it too. I'm like, for example, I'm listening over the last few days. Here's one of the things that I keep noticing, and it's maddening to me. They keep calling it a spending bill. It's a spending bill. It's a spending bill. No, it's not a spending bill.
Right.
It's an investment.
That's exactly right.
It's an investment in the people of this country. And if Democrats would stop letting them drive the narrative that way.
Absolutely.
Because, well, who's not against profligate spending?
Right.
It's the argument that the Republicans always, they're taxing and spending. They're spending too much money. They're spending too much. They're putting too much on the credit card, which was fine when they wanted to pass a $1.2 trillion tax scam.
Absolutely.
Okay? But part of it is the Democrats failing in their being able to, in plain English, just explain the thing. It's not a spending bill. They're calling this term human infrastructure. And I think that was a good step in the right direction, right? Because you can invest all you want in the roads and the bridges, but guess what? If you don't invest in the people that got to go across those roads and bridges, you still ain't going to have anything at the end of the day. But the Democrats, where they have to do is they have to get a lot better at one of the reasons why we love Bill Clinton so much, because Bill Clinton had this knack for being able to explain things in plain English in a folksy way that, even your next door neighbor.
He was a great orator,
can understand.
absolutely.
Okay, they call Ronald Reagan the great communicator because he was simple, but there was power in the simplicity because he explained things in a way that people could understand. So what the Democrats need to do is they need to get better at explaining what this thing actually is, and then they need to push back against a media dialogue that keeps calling it something that it's not. It's not a spending bill. It's an investment in human capital. That's what it is.
Let me just say this for the people that's watching, and we'll close on this, is that a lot of people get upset with the Vice President Harris. You know, they get upset with Joe Biden, and I understand they get upset with the Democrats. But let's be real, for a good portion of this country that's dependent on criminal justice, that's dependent on voting rights, that's dependent on jobs, that's dependent on equality, and we have to make sure. And not only that, there's a good portion of white folks that's Democrats as well that need these policies to get pushed through. I will say, we cannot be done with the Biden administration. We cannot be done with the vice president. They are basically our only link right now. That's the only dance in town for Democrats, and we have to make sure we support them, and we have to make sure that we go to the polls on election day and in the primaries, people of color. We've got to make necessary big gains in the primaries to select who we want in the general election. I want to thank you guys for being here. I want to thank you guys for people that's watching the show. I want to thank you guys too. Thanks for being here. All right.